In the wake of the hierarchy fleet's retreat, Sol fell into a hush so profound it seemed even the stars were holding their breath. All across the solar system, humans emerged from bunkers, command stations, and orbital habitats, blinking into the light of their survival. The emergency sirens faded. The defense grids powered down. The old fear of annihilation, of being just another footnote in someone else's conquest, dissolved into something brighter and harder. Pride. In the hours that followed, the victory broadcast circled Earth and every outpost beyond. A single vessel had faced the hierarchy armada, and the hierarchy had fled. Not merely defeated, erased, in part, from their own understanding of what had happened. For many, this was the first true confirmation of the rumors that had haunted the periphery of human legend. That somewhere, deep within the hidden vaults of the solar system, slept weapons and knowledge that predated all the known civilizations of the galaxy. But even those who suspected the truth could not quite reconcile it with what they'd seen. In the main hall of the Interplanetary Assembly, hundreds of diplomats and military observers gathered to witness the post-battle debrief. Rachel Ilyanova stood at the rostrum in her simple fleet uniform, flanked by senior officers and a holographic projection of Sol's judgment itself. She looked out over the assembly, humans and allied species alike, and for a moment, allowed herself to feel their awe. "Yesterday," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater, "the hierarchy arrived in force. They expected our capitulation or our extinction. Instead, they met our resolve." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. "They underestimated humanity," she continued, her tone sharpening. "They believed that because we are fewer in number and younger in starflight, we would lack the will to defend ourselves. They believed our legends of the Soul Compact were exaggerations, propaganda at best." She paused, letting that sink in. "And they learned the final lesson of every invader who has ever come for us. Humanity does not yield. Not to threats, not to superior numbers, not to the cold arithmetic of annihilation." There were no cheers, only a quiet, fierce respect. One of the delegates, a tall, copper-skinned diplomat from the Orion Freeholds, raised a hand. "Commander Ilyanova, what of this, architect? Is it true that it erased the hierarchy's knowledge of this engagement?" Rachel inclined her head. "It is true. The architect was designed as a failsafe, to protect not only humanity but the broader galaxy from technologies that were never meant to be recovered. The hierarchy came perilously close to uncovering those technologies. In response, the architect severed their incursion from causality." A ripple of unease swept through the audience. "Then we should be afraid of you," the Orion delegate said, voice tight. "If you have such power," Rachel lifted her chin, "then be afraid. But remember this, we never built these things to conquer. We built them because when the darkness comes, humanity refuses to vanish. We built them because survival demands sacrifice, and because no one else would do it for us." Silence. In that moment, many in the chamber understood why Sol was feared and why it would never fall. After the assembly adjourned, Rachel returned to the viewing gallery overlooking the Earth. The blue marble spun below her, clouds drifting in slow motion over continents that had been scorched and rebuilt too many times to count. She remembered the early centuries, when humanity had barely crawled off its homeworld, when every neighboring power predicted they'd burn themselves out in internecine wars, when the first alien scouts came to study them like curiosities, and she remembered the first time an invader tried to test humanity's resolve. Those early wars had nearly broken them. But in the breaking, something harder had formed, a collective promise never to kneel again. Footsteps approached. Admiral Kenji Takeda, her mentor and the architect of the Soul Compact's modern doctrine, stopped beside her. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were bright with pride. "You did well," he said softly. She gave him a wry look. "It wasn't just me." "No. He folded his hands behind his back, gazing down at Earth. It never is. It's every generation that refused to let the fires go out. They stood together in silence for a long time. At last, he turned to her with a weary smile. What will you say to the historians when they ask you how it felt to watch the hierarchy flee? She considered that. I'll tell them, she said quietly, that it felt like standing on the shoulders of ghosts. Like carrying every stubborn, impossible hope humanity ever dared to dream. He nodded. Good answer. In orbit, the last fragments of the hierarchy's presence tumbled away, twisted hulls and shattered pride, drifting into the dark. And, as the Soul Compact resumed its quiet vigilance, the message was clear. Humanity would not be forgotten. It would not be conquered, and it would never, ever stop fighting to exist on its own terms. Above them, the stars glittered in perfect indifference. Saul's judgment waited in silent readiness for whatever came next. This is the custodian of the Enceladus archive, it intoned. Human designation, architect. You have transgressed against a protected civilization. The Soul Compact has invoked the final mandate. The bridge crew stiffened. Every officer, every technician turned to Zaldareth. Final mandate? He whispered. Saul's judgment had invalidated their weapons. But this was something else. On the screen, the architect rotated fractionally, aligning some unseen array toward the hierarchy fleet. Rachel Ilyanova's image returned, overlaid beside it. For the first time, her expression shifted. Not to triumph, but to something like sorrow. We did not wish to wake the architect, she said. It is not a tool of defense. It is a final measure to ensure that what was buried on Enceladus is never replicated. What are you talking about? Zaldareth demanded, though his voice shook. What are you going to do? Her gaze locked onto his. We will remove the concept of your incursion. Before he could reply, the architect released a pulse of harmonic resonance that rippled through every hierarchy system. Screens blanked. Power readings flatlined. Even the emergency lights faded, leaving them suspended in an uncanny darkness. And in that darkness, Zaldareth felt something slip away, a memory, the memory of why they were here. He turned to his officers, forcing his mouth to form words he could no longer fully comprehend. Why? Why did we come to this place? No one answered. He tried to recall the grand strategic objectives, the centuries of conquest, the reasons this planet had been worth the risk. But the chain of thought unraveled in his mind like rotted thread. The architect's voice returned, echoing not just through the air but inside them. Causality excision in progress. The narrative of your aggression will be nullified across local temporal strata. You will remember only that you were repelled. A wave of horror and relief surged together in Zaldareth's chest. They weren't going to die. But they were. About to become something less than themselves. Creatures stripped of the reason they had ever dared this invasion. He gripped the console so hard his claws cracked it. You can't. Rachel's voice overlaid the architect's, softer now. You forced this outcome. You were warned by the others. You refused to listen. And so your memory of the forbidden knowledge and of this defeat will be severed. When you return to your empire, you will remember only that soul is unconquerable. Across the void, the architect's prismatic filaments began to blaze with impossible colors. Time itself seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretching into an eternity. And in that suspended instant, as everything he had ever built began to dissolve, Zaldareth felt the final realization take hold. Humanity had not merely beaten them. They had become the wardens of something older and vaster than any empire, and they would never allow it to be threatened again. The light flared. Memory burned away, and the hierarchy fleet forgot why it had come to die. Time dilated in a way no hierarchy chronometer could measure. A heartbeat stretched into a lifetime as the architect's impossible luminescence filled every sensor, every thought. Then with a soft flicker, the light contracted back into itself. The darkness receded. And all at once, motion returned. Hierarchy fleet shuddered as propulsion came online. Systems flickered with partial power. But where thousands of command processes should have been, there was only an eerie blankness, like a vast ledger that had been scrubbed clean. On the bridge of the ossuary, Admiral Zaldareth gasped, clutching the edge of the tactical sphere. His vision swam. A tide of confusion crashed through his mind, an unmoored sense that he was missing something colossal. His second-in-command turned to him, eyes wide and uncomprehending. "Sir, our memory archives are corrupted. Half of our strategic logs are gone, the last 3 cycles of data erased." Zaldareth tried to remember why they had come to Sol. What prize or threat had demanded this armada? Nothing came. Only a hollow ache. On the view screen, Sol's judgment drifted aside, making way for the titanic silhouette of the architect. Though no weapons were visible, its presence radiated a force more absolute than any superweapon the hierarchy had ever conceived. A transmission crackled into existence. Not visual this time, just Rachel Ilyanova's voice. "Grand Admiral Zaldareth, you are free to depart Sol space." He swallowed, throat dry as desiccated bone. "And if we remain, then your fleet will be removed in totality. And your civilization will remember nothing of you." He looked across the bridge. Officers stared back, some visibly trembling, others numb. No one asked if they should fight on. No one even considered it. He drew himself up, spine clicking into rigid posture. "Navigation," he rasped. "Plot a withdrawal course. All vessels. Formation Omega. Prepare to jump at my mark." A chorus of affirmatives. Subdued and disoriented, the tactical displays filled with icons as the surviving ships began to maneuver. Hundreds of capital vessels realigning their vectors, some with scorched hulls, some still intact. But all stripped of the purpose that had once unified them. As they turned away from Sol, Zaldareth felt a pressure lift from his thoughts, a malignant certainty that had coiled there like a parasite, whispering of conquest. He could not remember exactly what had driven them to this place. Only that the hierarchy had tried and failed, and in that failure, something primal had been taught to them. Sol was not merely defended. Sol was inviolate. On the view screen, the architect rotated, impossibly vast, its prismatic hull shifting through hues no hierarchy language had ever named. As it passed, all other sensors dimmed: gravity, radiation, electromagnetism dwarfed by the sheer presence of the thing. One by one, the hierarchy ships slipped into jump formation, drive flares lighting the void. Just before the ossuary engaged its own jump engines, Rachel Ilyanova's voice spoke one last time. "Remember this, Admiral. Humanity is not exceptional because we desire war. We are exceptional because, when forced to choose, we will not flinch from defending what is ours, even if it costs the universe its coherence." And then she was gone. Zaldareth opened his mouth, but no words came. He closed his eyes and gave the order. "Execute." In a flare of blue-white energy, the ossuary leapt into the extra-dimensional corridor. Within moments, the entire armada had vanished, leaving Sol's judgment and the architect alone amid drifting wreckage and silent stars. Aboard Sol's judgment, Commander Rachel Ilyanova stood alone at the forward viewport, her face lit by the wan glow of Earth in the distance. She drew a slow breath. The adrenaline was still in her veins, though she kept her expression neutral. Behind her, an aide approached quietly. "The hierarchy fleet has disengaged. No further contacts." Rachel nodded. "And the architect?" "It has entered low energy." "Stand by, ma'am. Reintegrating with the Enceladus vault. All containment protocols are intact." "Good," she murmured. She looked out at her homeworld, fragile blue, radiant. So many centuries humanity had clawed for the right to survive, to claim their place without apology, to defy any power that tried to break them. And now, In the silent aftermath, she knew the truth of their legacy. Humans did not win by being stronger. They won because, when tested to the brink, they refused to surrender their memory, their stubborn will to be no matter what came for them next. Slowly, she raised her hand to the control panel and keyed the all-clear signal. Across the solar system, human colonies and defense stations picked up her transmission. Relief and jubilation crackled through every frequency. Laughter and tears from a species that had once again survived the impossible. Rachel allowed herself a single exhale of satisfaction. Then she turned to her crew, her voice clear and steady. Transmit the after-action report to all nodes. Include this: the hierarchy has been repelled and will not return soon. Let the galaxy understand this is soul, this is humanity. We stand alone if we must, and we do not fall. The officer inclined his head. Message sent, Commander. And in the quiet that followed, Rachel Ilyanova allowed herself to feel just for a heartbeat, the weight and the pride of all humanity resting on her shoulders out above them. The architect shimmered once, then sank back into the spatial rift, vanishing into legend. The command bridge of the ossuary seethed with quiet chaos. Officers hissed commands and counter-commands, all trying to assert some semblance of order as Saul's judgment continued its inexorable spiral. On the main view screen, more ships fell. Dark icons winking out or shifting into that dreadful gray. Redacted. Helm. Zaldareth shouted, his throat plates scraping harshly. Engage emergency vector escape. Max burn. I want us moving now. The helmsman's claws danced across controls, inputting coordinates for the nearest jump corridor. The starfield began to yaw, inertia dampers shuddering. But the engines never fired. Drive ignition failure, the helm reported, voice cracking. Sir, all systems read functional, but the initiation event doesn't manifest. Override safeties, we've tried. The system believes it's firing, telemetry shows complete success, except nothing happens in real space. Across the tactical sphere, hierarchy ships executed similar attempts. Some tried to fire again. Some dumped their fuel reserves in desperation, hoping the explosion would at least yield thrust. Others launched drones, futile acts of denial in the face of an enemy that refused to play by the rules. Nothing worked. Saul's judgment drifted closer to the ossuary, so near now that its matte black hull filled the viewport like a wall of night. No lights, no insignia. Just a cold, perfect surface. Gunnery, Zaldareth rasped. Prep antimatter scuttling. If we can't flee, we will not be taken intact. The gunnery chief glanced at him, eyes hollow. Sir, even if we scuttle, what stops them from nullifying the detonation, the same way they nullify everything else? No one had an answer, and still, that voice spoke inside Zaldareth's mind. This is what happens when you underestimate them. This is what happens when you forget the old caution, that humanity's greatest weapon is not their machines, but the way they refuse to accept defeat. A low chime sounded, and the communications feed flared to life once more. Rachel Ilyanova returned, her image perfectly calm. Grand Admiral, you are attempting to withdraw. This action is not permitted. He lurched to his feet, rage and dread fusing in his chest. You cannot hold us here forever. Even your perception. Weapon must have limits. Her gaze did not waver. The Archaeotech Core's function is not to hold you. It is to ensure that the future you intended cannot occur. The tactical sphere flickered, and new icons bloomed across it. Ossuary's sister ships. The vast carrier pennants of 9. The Dreadnought Gravemind. All moving in perfect formation toward Earth. Except they weren't. The data resolved into a sickening realization. These were not hierarchy ships moving now. They were simulations' projected probabilities. What would have happened if Saul's judgment had not arrived? Her voice softened. Do you understand yet, Admiral? This is not just your defeat. This is the invalidation of every scenario you relied on. You believed there was a fixed sequence. Observe, adapt, overwhelm. But humanity doesn't adapt in the same arc. We endure in unpredictable ways. We find what you do not see. And then the final layer of horror unfolded. From Saul's judgment itself, dozens of shimmering tendrils of bluish light unspooled, like strands of liquid glass. They brushed gently across the hulls of still active hierarchy vessels. And where they touched, entire command subsystems ceased to exist. Not destroyed, removed, the Penance of Nine began to drift, its massive engines throttling to zero without any apparent failure. The flagship Gravemind vented atmosphere, but no hull breach appeared. Only the total erasure of internal pressurization. Someone on the bridge whispered, "They're not fighting us. They're dismantling our reality." Zaldareth could no longer deny the truth. The hierarchy's arsenal, its pride, its certainty, none of it mattered. The human vessel was not a ship. It was a judgment rendered in physics itself. And still, something primal in him rebelled. "Prepare boarding contingents," he snapped, voice rising. "We will breach them, manually cut our way in, sabotage this mechanism at the core." The sensor officer, to her credit, did not look away. "Sir, there is no evidence the interior is spatially consistent. Proximity scans detect mass displacement signatures that don't correspond to Euclidean volumes." He slammed a clawed fist on the console. "Do it anyway." As boarding craft prepped in the launch bays, Saul's judgment drifted closer, so close now that the matte hull eclipsed the stars. Rachel Ilyanova inclined her head slightly, as if in respect. "Grand Admiral, your defiance is noted. This will be your final act." And then, without flash or thunder, the tendrils retracted. A hush fell. For an instant, he almost dared to believe they were being spared. But in that heartbeat, the ossuary's entire drive array registered 0 potential states. No thrust, no fusion reactions, no containment fields. It wasn't that their engines failed. It was that in the new configuration of possibility, the engines never existed at all. On every channel, hierarchy officers screamed or prayed or simply stared in mute incomprehension as their fleet began to drift apart, powerless, weaponless, futureless. And somewhere in that silence, Zaldareth realized something even worse than defeat. He realized humanity had never intended to negotiate. They had simply waited for the right moment to reveal the magnitude of their advantage. One ship, one verdict, and the certainty that any empire arrogant enough to challenge Sol would one day regret it. The ossuary hung motionless in the void, all engines and weapons nullified by the impossible presence before them. All around, the hierarchy armada floated in silent disarray, great warships stripped of their purpose, their proud formations reduced to drifting monuments to failure. For a moment, there was nothing, no further demands, no more transmissions. Just the vast hush of inevitability settling over thousands of alien hearts. Zaldareth tried to think, tried to summon the cold, calculating clarity that had carried him to the pinnacle of hierarchy command. But nothing came. Every contingency had relied on the assumption that their enemy was bounded by the same laws as themselves, that no civilization could ever possess true invulnerability. And yet, here it was. He opened his mouth to speak, to order a final broadcast of surrender, if only to preserve some fragment of dignity, when something new began to unfold across the tactical sphere. At first, he thought it was a malfunction, a bright point of light, swelling in the darkness far beyond the human vessel. But the readings were clear, a spatial rupture, kilometers across, unfolding in shimmering concentric layers. "Admiral," the sensor officer whispered, voice ragged, "we have a new contact." "Human reinforcements?" "No, sir," she swallowed. We don't know. Its signature doesn't match anything in our archives." On the view screen, the aperture widened into a vast ring of brilliance. Geometries impossible to look It directly flickered along its circumference shapes that implied dimensions no hierarchy physicist had ever conceived. And then, as if reality itself sighed, a second ship emerged. No emerged was too simple. It coalesced as though its form was an idea that space had only just decided to permit. Even compared to Saul's judgment, this new vessel was monstrous, a wedge of negative space, rimmed with prismatic filaments that shimmered in colors the hierarchy's cameras could not parse. Its hull seemed to absorb the starlight and reflect it as a low, harmonic pulse that made the deck vibrate under their feet. For the first time, Zaldareth felt something deeper than dread. He felt awe. What are we seeing? A new voice answered him, transmitting across every channel simultaneously. It was nothing like Rachel Ilyanova's precise calm. This voice was deeper, older, resonant in a way that felt as if it spoke from behind the fabric of causality itself. And every drone simply vanished. No explosion, no debris field, no radiation burst. One instant they were there, thousands of tons of war machinery, and the next they were gone. The gunnery chief's voice was a hoarse whisper. They disappeared. Impossible. Zaldareth hissed. Nothing can erase matter so. A warning klaxon shrieked, drowning him out. A new contact appeared on the periphery of the tactical holosphere, Saul's judgment, now impossibly closer, less than 30,000 kilometers. Away, they jumped. The sensor officer stammered. But we detected no gravimetric flux, no propulsion signature. Zaldareth felt the first tremor of something he could not name. It coiled beneath his exoskeleton, colder than fear. He forced himself to speak. Evenly. Lock plasma batteries. Fire on my mark. Outside the viewport, the human vessel rotated lazily. No shields shimmered around it. No visible weapons arrays unfolded. Mark. The hierarchy's main guns ignited space itself. Twin beams of searing green plasma lanced across the darkness, converging on the lone target with more power than had been used to burn the moons of Corvihal to ash. For an instant, Zaldareth felt grim satisfaction, but when the glare subsided, Saul's judgment was still there. Entirely unmarked. A hush descended. Impact confirmed, said the gunnery chief, voice brittle. But no effect. On the main screen, a comms indicator pulsed, accompanied by the same calm human voice. You have made your choice. One of the junior officers turned to Zaldareth, his skin a pallid green. Sir, what are they? He did not answer. Because in that moment, he realized the question was not what, but how the humans could possess a ship that defied every law his civilization understood. Somewhere deep in the hierarchy's vast data archives, the humans were recorded as a young species, barely a few centuries into the stars. Their fleet was a patchwork of colonial freighters and old Earth warships. They should have been predictable, fragile, yet the evidence flickered in front of him. No emission signature, no shields, no propulsion trails, an unbreakable encryption. A resonance that could cripple sensors across 1,000 warships. And now, the simplest and most terrifying proof, immunity to direct fire. Zaldareth felt the eyes of his crew on him, waiting for orders that no longer made sense. The logical voice in his mind began to whisper, they have hidden something. They have hidden everything. He had led the conquest of worlds and the slaughter of billions. But as Saul's judgment began to drift between the foremost hierarchy ships, unhurried and unafraid, a realization started to crystallize. This was not a single vessel coming to die. It was coming to judge them. Saul's judgment passed through the front line of hierarchy warships like a shadow across glass, unimpeded, untouched, and seemingly uninterested. The dreadnought Halaveth opened fire, launching a barrage of tungsten rods at near relativistic speed. The rods never struck. They vanished in mid-flight, their kinetic trails simply ceasing. No impact, no energy release. Just gone. The same happened again with the Ceruz-class gunships. 3 of them launched fusion torpedoes. The torpedoes disarmed mid-flight, as if someone had reached into their systems and flipped the safeties. During acceleration, panic wasn't visible on the hierarchy command bridge. Discipline still held, but it rippled beneath the surface. Tightening jaws, twitching eyes, trembling claws. Something fundamental was breaking, something deeper than tactics or weapons. It was the illusion of control. Admiral Zaldareth stared at the monitor, mouth slightly agape, as Saul's judgment executed perfect arc and began spiraling inward, toward the heart of his formation. "It's not attacking," murmured his second-in-command. "It's weaving." He was right. The human vessel drifted with uncanny grace through the fleet, looping silently between ships. No weapons deployed, no shields raised. Yet with each pass, another ship fell silent. First Valaktor, then Nezirkai, then Alaxis. Not destroyed just ... dead. Lights extinguished. Guns silent. Entire systems frozen in place as if time itself had paused on board. Zaldareth barked, "Deploy internal probes. Get eyes on those ships. I want visuals, audio, I want confirmation." The screens blinked. A dozen video feeds from the Valaktor flickered into life. The bridge crew was frozen mid-action. Officers stiffened their chairs. Techs slumped over consoles. Not dead, not panicked, just locked, unmoving, as though the moment had been extracted and pinned like an insect beneath glass. "What the void is this?" whispered a junior officer. "They haven't been attacked, they've been stopped." Then it came, the transmission, every screen on the bridge, every holographic projector, even the dim emergency lights, they all flickered once, then synchronized to a single image. A human face. It was a woman. Middle age, sharp eyes, expression unreadable. She wore no insignia. Her background was a void of perfect black, as though she existed outside even light. "This is Fleet Commander Rachel Ilyanova," she said, voice calm, devoid of anger or pride. Just absolute certainty. Saul's judgment is not a weapon. It is a decision. Zaldareth straightened, antennae drawn taut. "Open a channel now," the comms officer tried. "She's not transmitting on any known frequency." "We can't." Rachel Ilyanova turned her gaze directly into Zaldareth's. He froze. It was impossible. There were no cameras, no scans, but she saw him. Somehow she saw him. Hierarchy designation: Grand Admiral Zaldareth. "You have violated the Accords of Lucian Theta. You have trespassed into sole sovereign territory with genocidal intent. You have fired upon a vessel dispatched under Global Consensus Directive. By Interspecies Code 971, your command is nullified." Zaldareth felt cold. Not fear, no. Not yet, but close. "This is nonsense. We know nothing of such accords." "Because you were not supposed to," she replied, her tone never shifting. "Because humanity never intended to speak with you. Saul's judgment was not made for diplomacy. It was made for verdicts." "What is this?" His second-in-command croaked. "What kind of ship is that?" The screens changed. No longer Rachel Ilyanova. Now, schematics, impossible to interpret. Non-Euclidean architecture, fractal layers, recursive designs that blurred the eyes. Not human. Not alien. Not understandable, but unmistakably real. "These are fragments of the archaeotech," said Rachel, her voice overlaying the images. "Recovered from the surface of Saturn's moon Enceladus 80 years ago. Humanity spent decades trying to unlock its functions. We never succeeded in understanding it fully. But we did learn enough to weaponize its core mechanism, perception collapse." The words hung in the air. "Saul's judgment doesn't destroy ships," she continued. "It collapses probability states. It removes the possibility of enemy success erases. The conditions in which your weapons can fire, or your ships can survive. This is not warfare. It is mathematical inevitability. Admiral Zaldareth felt the world tilt. Every instinct screamed that this couldn't be real. No civilization, no matter how cunning, could possess technology that rewrote causality. It defied entropy. It spat on the foundation of all strategic doctrine. It was myth. And yet, as another cruiser fell still, systems locking up, life signs suspended, he knew. Deep in the part of his mind that had survived wars and betrayals, that knew when death was not just coming, but already here, he knew. They hadn't brought one ship to 1,000 as an act of desperation. They had brought it because that's all they needed. He turned, eyes wide, voice a rasp. Get us out. Begin full retreat. Now. But even as he spoke, the navigation displays began to flicker. Their drive systems were still functioning, but the outcomes were no longer responding. Saul's judgment had entered the second phase. The phase Rachel Ilyanova didn't need to explain. Not. Destruction. Reda, CTION. One by one, the hierarchy ships were being written out of relevance. Not killed, erased. In the cold black of the Perseus verge, 1,000 warships moved as one. Silver hulls caught the distant starlight in glimmers, like a fleet of predatory fish converging on wounded prey. From the bridge of the hierarchy flagship Ossuary Grand, Admiral Zaldareth watched the blue-white orb of Earth slowly grow in the forward display. A hush settled among his bridge crew. Equal parts anticipation and disdain. They had crushed 12 civilizations in as many decades. Humanity would be the 13th, and no more remarkable than any of the others, or so the hierarchy believed. Their strategists had projected less than 4% losses in subjugation operations. Their tactical A's predicted the surrender of all human defense forces within 12 hours. Their historians promised the entire campaign would serve as a footnote to the inevitable. When Earth's final diplomatic transmission arrived, it was received with derisive amusement. We are dispatching one vessel. That was it. No entreaty for peace, no surrender conditions, no apologies for resisting their rightful dominion. Just a statement so absurd the comms officer struggled not to laugh as he read it aloud. One vessel. Zaldareth repeated in a dry rasp. His throat plates clicked together as he exhaled, a sound that in his species marked disappointment. They truly are primitives. Around him, the command dais came alive with shifting hollas, force dispersal maps, electromagnetic readouts, kinetic targeting solutions. The ossuary and her sister dreadnoughts carried more firepower than any force ever mustered in this quadrant. A single ship, no matter how defiant, could not change that arithmetic. Still, if he was honest with himself, Zaldareth felt something he hadn't in decades. Not fear. He didn't believe in that. But curiosity. An itch in the back of his head. Mind, easily ignored but impossible to dismiss entirely. The sensor officers began plotting a deceleration vector to establish blockade orbit over Earth's largest population centers. From there, they would project a combination of kinetic bombardment and atmospheric biocontrol dispersals. Even if the humans resisted to the last soldier, the hierarchy would scour their defenses in days. And then came the harvest technology. Genetic material, resources. A quiet ping chimed on the comms board. Admiral, the comms officer said, voice quavering in confusion. They've transmitted a follow-up. The bridge grew still. Even the automated servitors paused in their ceaseless maintenance, as though sensing the moment's weight. Play it. Zaldareth commanded. A human voice spoke, crisp and unwavering. To the hierarchy armada, Saul's judgment will intercept. This is your sole warning. The message ended. Silence reclaimed the bridge. No one laughed this time. Zaldareth's second-in-command finally dared to speak. Their bluff is pathetic. One ship cannot. Silence, the admiral snapped. His eyes locked onto the tactical feed. A new blip had appeared at the periphery of the hierarchy's formation. Small, alone, no support vessels, no escorts. But it was moving straight toward them with unwavering precision. "Magnify," he ordered. The image resolved into a sleek hull of matte black, so dark it seemed to absorb the sensor overlay entirely. Not a single energy spike betrayed conventional propulsion or shield emitters. No emission signature at all impossible for any modern craft. A ripple of discomfort spread among the bridge officers. "Scan it again," Zeldareth hissed. They tried. The scanners returned nothing but static. It was as though the ship defied measurement. "Perhaps," the Admiral muttered, "it's some primitive decoy. A diversion to cover a planetary defense." But no one truly believed that. Because the humans had been very clear. One vessel. Even the AI that assisted the hierarchy strategic calculations hesitated. An infinitesimal delay that Zeldareth alone perceived. That delay disturbed him more than any human bravado could. On the lower decks, gun crews prepared to target the intruder. Missile batteries aligned. Plasma lances spooled their capacitors. The bridge pulsed with lethal purpose, and yet, he found his gaze drifting back to the slowly rotating shape on the screen. There was no insignia, no identification. Just a name. Broadcasting on an open channel in every known hierarchy dialect, Saul's Judgment. Somewhere in the archives of his mind, he recalled an ancient proverb of his people, that which comes alone is not always alone. He shook off the thought. He was Grand Admiral Zeldareth. He had overseen the extinction of entire species. He had cracked planetary crusts and poisoned oceans when needed. He would not be unnerved by a single human warship, no matter how unusual. Yet as Earth's pale glow crept larger and the distance between predator and prey shrank to a final confrontation, he could not help but feel the faintest suspicion. Perhaps, just perhaps, this time would be different. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the sensor range, Saul's Judgment drifted closer, silent, patient, inevitable. The hierarchy armada began to unfold its attack formation, a vast phalanx of dreadnoughts and carriers spreading like a metal storm across the void. Automated couriers raced between ships, relaying the last targeting sequences in case the humans attempted any desperate maneuvers. On the bridge of the ossuary, Grand Admiral Zeldareth remained motionless, claws tapping a slow rhythm against the console as he watched the singular blip. Saul's Judgment glide closer. "Long-range ordnance status?" he asked. "All missile batteries report ready. Plasma lances at 87% charge," the gunnery chief replied, voice taut. "Target the vessel. Await my command to fire." He could feel the tension thickening, every officer in the chamber waiting for the obvious. One ship against 1,000. It was absurd. All that remained was to destroy it, then press onward to the true conquest. But as they prepared, something curious began to happen. "Admiral," said a comms officer, "we're detecting anomalous frequencies. Extremely low bandwidth, more like harmonic resonance." "What origin?" "Origin unknown. But they're radiating from the human ship. Attempt to jam." "Already trying, sir. It's difficult." He turned, mandibles flaring with irritation. "Explain." The officer swallowed. "Sir, it's not using conventional encryption or modulation. It's broadcasting at base harmonic intervals that seem to slip under our disruption nets, then widen the nets. We've already..." A deeper static growled across every speaker in the chamber, followed by a tone that made Zeldareth's inner ear canals throb. His vision flickered for an instant, the ship's status overlays fracturing into meaningless lines, and then the tone vanished. "Report," he barked. No answer came for 3 seconds. Every ship in the hierarchy fleet had experienced the same momentary blackout. "Communications are recovering," another officer gasped. "But, sir, our sensor arrays are fluctuating. They can't maintain a lock." On the display, the single blip representing Saul's Judgment faded in and out. as though reality itself could not decide if it belonged here. Zeldareth studied the readout, his eyes narrowing. "Deploy intercept drones," he ordered. Within moments, a sphere of automaton hunters launched from the nearest cruisers. They hurtled toward the intruder in perfect synchronization, each packed with enough antimatter to obliterate a battleship. In silence, the bridge crew watched the drones converge. But as they did, the strange resonance returned, rippling through the decks like the echo of a dying star. The blip of Saul's judgment brightened, then dimmed again.